수출이 많이 되는 것도 다른 문화가 수출이 되는 것도 역시 나라의 힘이 조금 더 세져서라는 생각이 들어요. 그래서 사실 이 국격이라는 것이 경제적인 것만 있는 것이 아니라 사실 세계 시민으로서 어떻게 행동하는가, 인권이나 환경이나 난민이나 인종 문제에 대해서 어떻게 대응하는가, 이것도 작용하지 않는가 생각하고요. 네, 국격이 더 높아지기를 기원합니다.
Arirang TV is conducting an overseas TV viewer survey to provide you with a better global broadcast service. Share your valuable feedback on the Arirang TV website www.arirang.com or mobile application. Survey participants will be selected at random to receive special gifts. 2025 Arirang Overseas TV Viewer Survey. We look forward to hearing from you.
In our headlines on this Wednesday, July 23rd, here in South Korea. Today, we count down 100 days to the start of this year's APEC Leaders Summit in the city of Gyeongju, and Prime Minister Kim Min-seok has reaffirmed Korea's commitment to a successful hosting. The Trump administration's tariff on Japanese imports into the American market has been lowered to 15%, and Tokyo has reportedly agreed to import American rice. Now, this is according to Trump himself on social media. Meanwhile, at least 23 people have lost their lives to last week's torrential rain, and authorities here believe the death toll may continue to rise as search operations for the missing continue. South Korea is hosting this year's APEC Forum, and with 100 days left to the start of the summit, Prime Minister Kim Min-seok chaired a related meeting to check on the preparations thus far. Our Song Yoo-jin reports.
Tens of thousands of people, delegates, including world leaders, CEOs, and journalists, will gather in the South Korean city of Gyeongju this fall for the Asia-Pacific Economic Cooperation, or APEC, Leaders Meeting. With 100 days to go, new Prime Minister Kim Min-seok, the head of the event's preparation committee, chaired a meeting on Wednesday to review preparations and progress.
Just as the 1988 Seoul Olympics changed Korea's global standing, this year's APEC carries even greater historic weight. It's a chance to reestablish Korea's place in the world after last year's political turmoil. We must aim for an unprecedented APEC that exceeds expectations across diplomacy, venues, accommodations, programming, and service.
Member states will discuss digital innovation and regional connectivity at the two-day leaders meeting from October 31st to November 1st. Eyes are on who will attend in person, especially U.S. President Donald Trump, China's Xi Jinping, and Russia's Vladimir Putin.
From transport and logistics to medical services, all government agencies will work as one so that there are no gaps in the preparation. Specific programs will be finalized by August, infrastructure completed by September, and rehearsals conducted in October so that we're fully ready by October 31st.
And the APEC CEO Summit will bring together world leaders and prominent business figures for meaningful dialogue.
We're focusing on next-generation AI chips, digital transformation, and e-commerce. We plan to host 77 speakers, 17 heads of state, and 60 top-tier figures over 19 hours of programming. It will be the longest CEO summit in APEC history.
Wednesday's meeting was broadcast live, part of the government's effort to ignite public interest.
We encourage you to visit Gyeongju, learn more about our history, and follow our APEC preparations. We'll open new dialogue and feedback channels with the public.
This will be the first summit-level multilateral event held in South Korea under President Lee Jae-myung, which means it could serve as a test of his administration's diplomatic strategy. 송유진, Arirang News.
In related news, K-pop artist Gragon has been appointed honorary ambassador of this year's APEC summit in the Korean city of Gyeongju. The appointment was announced by Prime Minister Kim Min-seok on social media, where he called Gragon an artist who represents South Korea. He added the singer continues to show passion and creativity through his artistic endeavors, including his recent transmission of music into space. Officials also believe his appointment will draw greater global attention to the upcoming multilateral meeting. The Trump administration's tariff on Japanese imports into the American market has been lowered to 15%, and Tokyo has reportedly agreed to import American rice. Our Lee Seung-jae has details.
U.S. President Donald Trump announced on Tuesday that Washington will impose a 15% tariff on goods from Japan. In a social media post, the U.S. leader touted what he called a massive deal that would also see Japan invest $550 billion into the U.S., adding that the U.S. would receive 90% of the profits. Trump also noted that Japan will open trade to cars and trucks, rice, and certain other agricultural products. Trump also announced on Tuesday that the U.S. will charge a 19% tariff on goods from the Philippines. The figure is a percentage point lower than what was announced in April. The announcement was made in a social media post, with Trump saying that Washington had reached a deal with Manila after holding talks with Philippine President Ferdinand Marcos Jr. at the White House. In exchange, the U.S. will see zero tariffs on goods going to the Southeast Asian nation. Meanwhile, the U.S. has agreed to lower the tariff imposed on Indonesia from 32% to 19%. The U.S. will see virtually no tax on all American goods shipped to Indonesia. The U.S. will also be exempt from most regulations on automobiles, agricultural products, and pharmaceuticals exports to the Southeast Asian nation. According to a senior Trump administration official, Indonesia will reduce tariffs to 0% on over 99% of the products from the U.S. and eliminate all non-tariff barriers. With the U.S. and China still trying to strike a trade deal, U.S. Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent announced Tuesday that a third round of trade talks with Beijing is scheduled for next week in Sweden. Speaking to Fox Business, Bessent said that he will be in Stockholm from July 28th to 29th with his Chinese counterparts, adding that they'll be working out what is likely an extension. With Seoul also working to strike a deal with Washington before the August 1st deadline, South Korea's Finance Minister Koo Yoon-chul said Tuesday that he would hold so-called 2+2 high-level trade talks with the U.S. on Friday. Koo said he and Trade Minister Yeo Han-gu will head to Washington for the talks involving Besant and U.S. Trade Representative Jamieson Greer. Without a trade deal, South Korea is set to face 25% tariffs on all goods entering the U.S. 이승재, Arirang News.
Seeking exemptions from product-specific U.S. tariffs will be, quote, very challenging. Now, this is according to Stephen Vaughn, former acting U.S. trade representative, while addressing members of the Korean media in Washington on Tuesday, local time. South Korea has been pressing for exemptions on products such as steel, which faces a 50% tariff, and autos, which have been slapped with a 25% tariff. The former trade official pointed out that steel and autos are seen as critical to U.S. security and warned that slashing tariffs for one ally would open the floodgates for others. He nonetheless hinted that greater access for American agricultural products like rice and beef into the Korean market might help Seoul's case. The defense ministries of South Korea and the U.S. have chosen the engine of the CH-47 Chinook heavy-lift helicopter for a maintenance, repair and overhaul project, also known as MRO. The choice was made during a regular Logistics Cooperation Committee meeting here in capital Seoul this past Tuesday. The MRO for the American helicopter's engine will be carried out in South Korea. Hanwha Aerospace is expected to undertake the task, as it is the only domestic company that has the experience in maintaining this type of engine. The death toll from last week's torrential rain has risen yet again. Our Moon Hye-ryun has the latest.
At least 23 people have died following the heavy rains that swept across South Korea last week, with the death toll continuing to rise as search and rescue operations press on. 2 more bodies were recovered on Wednesday morning, one in Gapyeong-gun County, Gyeonggi Province, and another in Sancheong-gun County, Gyeongsangnam-do Province, where 13 fatalities have been confirmed. Authorities have identified the body found in Gapyeong as one of the individuals previously reported missing. The other remains unidentified, bringing the current number of missing people still unaccounted for to 6. Search efforts are ongoing in Sancheong, where a fire department official said that while receding water levels have improved conditions slightly, the search remains challenging due to limited equipment access, forcing crews to rely heavily on manual inspections. In Gapyeong, search teams involving more than 700 personnel continue, but have been prolonged due to rapid water currents. Meanwhile, residents in the area are grappling with the aftermath of the torrential rains and landslides that devastated homes, businesses and farmlands.
The cowshed was completely flooded. We got a warning from the village center telling us to evacuate, but with the cows here, we couldn't leave. It was heartbreaking.
Nearly 2 million livestock died due to the heavy rains since last Wednesday, while nearly 3 hectares of crops were destroyed. Many returned to find their properties unrecognizable. Buildings reduced to rubble, interiors buried under layers of mud, and entire crops destroyed.
The damage is just overwhelming. The water's been cut off, so there's nothing we can do. There's no electricity, no running water.
As the nation continues to reel from the destruction, rescue crews remain in a race against time, working around the clock to locate the missing and support recovery efforts. Moon Hye-ryun, Arirang News.
Also, on the local front, more babies were born and more marriages were noted in May, both extending months of consecutive rises. Our Kim Do-yeon has details.
South Korea recorded an increase in birth for the 11th consecutive month in May amid a nationwide policy push and delayed marriages during the pandemic leading to births. According to Statistics Korea on Wednesday, the number of babies born in May rose 3.8% on year to 20,309, marking the fastest growth for that month in 14 years, but the pace of increase has started to narrow. Looking at the year up to May, the total number of babies stands at 106,048, up 6.9% compared to the same period last year. This is the fastest growth rate recorded since 1981, when data started being collected. Statistics Korea is showing cautious optimism amid the country's struggle with a demographic crisis.
The rise in marriages has played a role, along with an increase in the number of women entering their early 30s, a key childbearing age group. There's also been a gradual shift toward a more positive perception of childbirth.
In fact, for 14 straight months, marriages have been going up. May this year had 6.7% more marriages than last year. On the other hand, there are concerns that this is only because of the low point from the COVID era and delayed marriages, especially considering that the rising rate has been getting smaller.
So while the number of births is rising, what's important to note is that this doesn't necessarily signal a rebound in the fertility rate. It's not driven by structural or fundamental changes, and that's reflected in the fact that the year-on-year growth is gradually slowing.
The fertility rate right now stands at 0.75, meaning the population is still shrinking. Some experts do believe the rate will go up with this trend, but a more long-term plan is necessary to bring the rate up to a healthy level, with policies to push marriages and births through financial support having limited impact. Kim Do-yeon, Arirang News.
Meanwhile, the outlook on housing prices here in the country has declined tangibly. According to the Bank of Korea, the housing price forecast index for July stood at 109, down 11 points on month. Now, while the index remains higher than the long-term average of 107, its reading for this month is the largest monthly decline in 3 years and reflects a substantial fall in the number of people who believe home prices will rise over the next year. Now, bank officials are linking this latest finding to the recent implementation of real estate loan regulation by the Lee Jae-myung administration. The National Gambling Control Commission has made public its 2024 statistics report on speculative industries as part of efforts to crack down on illegal gambling. According to the report released today, on-site monitoring activities targeting illegal gambling operations have tripled on year, demonstrating the government's commitment to creating a safer and more responsible social environment. Just a few footsteps away from today's bustling Seoul Station stands its 100-year-old counterpart, which has now been transformed into a space for art. Our Park Hyo-bin was there.
Once a place of departures, the station now offers a different kind of arrival. The exhibition, Our Enchanting Paradise, brings together 50 works by 21 Korean artists, featuring sculpture, media art, virtual reality, and installations, all presented inside the century-old former horror station, now reborn as Culture Station's Horror 284.
This grand hall once echoed with the train whistle and footsteps. Now, a century later, it's filled with sounds of art and imagination.
Curators say the idea of paradise wasn't drawn from distant utopias, but from the very emotions this place once held: anticipation, hope, and relief.
The old Seoul Station represents both departures and arrivals. We wanted to show that paradise isn't one fixed idea. It's a journey each of us makes from our own place, in our own way.
In the main hall, once the heart of the station, a large-scale digital work by Hwang Se-jin reimagines a traditional Korean landscape painting, blurring the line between memory and illusion.
I was surprised by how diverse and unexpected the artworks were. The media art in the main hall really left an impression.
Do Jina's evolutionary chimera blinks and responds like a real person. Her AI-powered sculpture with human eyes and voice challenges the boundaries between life and machine, reminding us that in an age where nature and technology blur, we are called to rethink what paradise truly means.
Yeah, we think the exhibition is nice. and we like the mix of old things with new and modern things.
For me, it was the talking face downstairs with the moving eyes. It was like something new and different.
In a station once filled with departures and returns, art now fills in with meaning. In its century of change, it offers not only history, but also a moment of reflection through art. Park Hyobin, Arirang News.
In our interview segment today, we sit down with Asia's first ever bobsleigh Olympic medalist, who is now seeking to write a fresh chapter in sports diplomacy for South Korea. Our Park Go-nu files this report.
Legendary Korean bobslayer Won Yoon-jong appeared confident and full of anticipation after being named one of the final 11 candidates for membership of the IOC Athletes Commission last month.
Those candidates are role models in their own sports and have significant influence. So it's truly meaningful to be named among them.
If elected in the athletes' vote at the 2026 Winter Games, Won would become Korea's first winter sports athlete to hold a seat on the IOC Athletes Commission. Then he'd be able to act as a bridge between the IOC and athletes to listen to them and make sure they're represented throughout his 8-year term. Won says his own experience as an athlete has shaped how he hopes to serve.
If elected, I want to connect with athletes everywhere and speak with them freely. I've seen athletes struggling when transitioning after retirement. I want to support them through that phase and help address mental health concerns too. I also want to eradicate doping and protect clean athletes.
With climate change threatening the future of winter sports, Won says environmental advocacy should also be part of the job.
Athletes have a big influence on the public. If they take the lead in environmental campaigns, it can raise awareness and help preserve both the planet and winter sports.
But the road won't be easy. Won says he's ready to walk thousands of steps, literally, to meet athletes during the Olympics with sincerity. For the legendary bobsleigh athlete, challenge is nothing new, as it's been the driving force behind every milestone in his journey. So, what does challenge mean to you on a personal level? And as a person, Won Yoon-jong, what are your personal goals?
Challenge means growth and change to me. When I tried to become a bobsleigh athlete, it was a challenge, and I made it. I tried to get the medal, and it was a huge challenge for me whole my life. But yeah, I did it. I think there are lots of challenges if I want to get good outcomes. So I believe that I can be a better person through challenges.
No break until the end. With that mindset, Won says he'll keep racing forward just like on the bobsleigh track, toward what could be a new milestone for Korean sports diplomacy. Park Go-nu, Arirang News, Pyeongchang.
This is The World Now, bringing you the latest stories from around the globe. The United States has announced that it will pull out of the United Nations Cultural and Educational Agency, UNESCO, once again, as part of President Donald Trump's efforts to withdraw from international institutions. A White House spokesperson announced on Tuesday that the withdrawal will take effect in December 2026, adding that the country's continued participation in the agency is not in its national interest. U.S. officials criticized UNESCO's agenda, highlighting its diversity, equity, and inclusion initiatives and its 2011 acceptance of Palestine as misaligned with U.S. values. This marks the third U.S. departure following exits in 1984 under the Reagan administration and 2017 under Trump, with the U.S. then rejoining in 2003 and 2023, respectively. U.S. financial contributions currently represent approximately 8% of UNESCO's budget, down from over 20% previously. UNESCO's Director General Audrey Azoulay expressed deep regret, but emphasized that the agency is prepared both financially and operationally. Turkish Foreign Minister Hakan Fidan warned on Tuesday that Turkey will directly intervene to stop any attempt to fragment Syria or allow militants to gain autonomy. Fidan addressed reporters in Ankara at a joint news conference after recent clashes between the Druze and Bedouin groups in the city of Sueda. He also accused Israel of seeking to destabilize Syria and push for separatism in the south. The minister specifically warned Kurdish groups that any moves toward autonomy or independence would be seen as a big strategic catastrophe and a direct threat to Turkey's national security. Following a push by U.S. President Donald Trump, Coca-Cola announced on Tuesday that it will introduce a new version of its flagship product in the U.S. this fall, sweetened with domestic sugarcane. CEO James Quincy confirmed that to align with consumer demand, Coca-Cola will launch a U.S. cane sugar variant this fall, following Trump's appeal for real cane sugar instead of corn syrup. The new product will complement the core recipe rather than replacing the classic formulation. Coca-Cola also reported robust second-quarter profits, beating estimates for quarterly results. The company's comparable revenue beat estimates by increasing 2.5% in the 3 months up to June 27th. In the United Kingdom, Ozzy Osbourne, the legendary frontman of Black Sabbath, known as the Prince of Darkness, died on Tuesday at the age of 76. No immediate cause was given, though he had been battling Parkinson's disease since 2020. His final performance took place only recently on July 5th at Villa Park Stadium in his hometown of Birmingham, with the proceeds donated to organizations such as Parkinson's UK. Over his 5-decade career with Black Sabbath and as a solo artist, Ozzy Osbourne sold more than 100 million records and earned a revered place in rock history. Tributes poured in worldwide, with Elton John calling him a true legend. 최지희, Arirang News.
The summer heat is warming up the whole country. Heatwave warnings have been issued across the country except for some inland areas of Gangwon-do and have been extended in Gyeongju Province, Chungcheongnam-do Province, and most of the south. Today, the daytime temperature in Seoul rose to 33 degrees Celsius, Gyeongsan 37 degrees, and the temperatures in most regions fell closer to 35 degrees. It will get hotter and hotter through the rest of the week. Tomorrow, the daytime temperature in Seoul will rise to 34 degrees, and on Friday and Saturday, it will rise to 36 degrees. Tomorrow morning, most areas will start off at around 25 degrees. Highs will move up to 35 degrees in Daejeon, 36 degrees in Gwangju and Daegu. Even at night, the heat will not cool down, and the tropical nights will continue. That's all for Korea. Here are the weather conditions around the world.
Those are the headlines at this hour here in South Korea. Coming up next is our daily panel session. Do stay with us.
(2025) celebrates the 80th anniversary of liberation. A place filled with culture, history, and diverse experiences. This is the Independence Hall of Korea. values of the independence movement. And together with the whole nation, we will make Korea great. The Independence Hall of Korea.
From breaking news in South Korea to stories from around the world, we're here to bring you the news that matters.
Truth, clarity, and impartiality. And that's what we uphold in a fast-changing world.
We go beyond the headlines, offering depth, context, and perspective.
This isn't just news, it's our commitment. News you trust. Arirang News.
Change the way you start skincare. 7 vegan peptide, maximum benefits for your skin. And amplify the effect of the next skincare step. Boosting, glowing, and brightening. Effortless care. Visible results. 7 vegan peptide booster. Mizone.
코딩을 배우고 싶어? 로보로보로 와! 로보로보와 코딩을 배워 로보로보와 사고력 키워 로보로보와 논리력 깨워 코딩 처음이라면 코딩 교육 전문가와 함께 로보로보와 시험을 목표 로보로보와 목표를 이뤄 로보로보와 내 꿈을 펼쳐
미래를 준비하는 코딩 교육 전문가
The upcoming APEC Leaders Gathering here in South Korea this autumn may provide the setting of a sideline summit between the presidents of the US and China. We have more on Press Perspective today. Hello and welcome to Wednesday's edition of Press Perspective. It's July 23rd here in Seoul. I'm Min Sun-hee. We are counting down 100 days to the start of this year's APEC Summit here in South Korea on October 31st. And already the upcoming multilateral gathering is making headlines. For more on this, I have Thomas Maresca with American news agency UPI here in the studio. Thomas, welcome back.
Thank you. Great to be here as always.
I also have Professor Kim Jae-chan at Seogang University joining our session virtually. Professor Kim, it's a pleasure to have you with us.
It's good to be here. Thank you.
Right, we will start here in the studio. Thomas, let's begin with details of the exclusive coverage by the South China Morning Post about a possible summit between the leaders of the US and China on the sidelines or around the APEC summit here in South Korea later this autumn.
Right, so there was a story in South China Morning Post, as you said. I saw something similar in Reuters, so I'm not sure how incredibly exclusive it is, but basically it sounds more like informed speculation than any idea that, you know, there's something definitive going to happen. I mean, we still don't even know actually if Trump is definitely coming to the APEC summit. It sounds like, he intends to, or that seems to be the general belief. But basically the idea was that, analysts and some unnamed sources close to Beijing and Washington are saying that, kind of maybe the wheels are moving towards a potential summit between Trump and Xi, and the APEC meeting would be kind of the ideal time, or would make the most sense, and it could be a sideline, meeting at APEC, or it could also be ahead of, if Trump could, on his way through Asia, could go to China. So that's, basically the outline of it, and then, also, it's based on the idea that there's been steps in motion. You can tell that both sides are kind of engaging. It's not a few months ago when Trump started the whole sort of reciprocal tariff, outline, and really targeted China specifically. There was a lot of, back and forth and raising of tariffs. But since then, in June, they agreed on an extension and actually, moved some pieces around. Like China agreed to start exporting rare earth minerals, and Trump and Washington eased some export controls on AI chips, and then Rubio and the Chinese foreign minister met earlier this month, and they sort of had it sounded like a reasonably positive meeting, and Rubio said there was a strong desire to set something up with Trump and Xi. So there's been a few things like that. Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent actually just yesterday said there's going to be a meeting next week in Sweden to discuss extending these tariff negotiations further. So, there's this idea that things are in motion, there's an interest on both sides, and so, it would make sense if they were to meet. APEC would be a good period, although this SCMP article and a few other things I've read have also mentioned that, China, in a way, is less urgent. It's less of an urgent thing for China. There's this sense that Trump has more of a need to maybe set this, to get something going, whereas China is taking this wait and see approach because there's so many other things going on with Trump's tariff schemes, and China might just want to sit back, or is maybe okay with sitting back and seeing what the fallout of all of this other turmoil is. So that's a little bit of that background as well.
Right then, Professor Kim, what would be the significance of such a summit between Mr. Trump and President Xi Jinping if it were to take place, and what might be on their agenda?
The summit between President Trump and President Xi, I think if it happens, it'll carry profound significance for several reasons. For one thing, there is geopolitical importance to the summit. It's no secret that two countries are locked in deepening strategic competition, maybe for a long haul. And given the strong leadership style of two leaders, President Trump and President Xi, they are known to be very strong leaders. For that reason, many analysts worry that the relationship between the two countries could spiral out of control because two leaders, they appear that they seldom back down. They are rather inclined to sharp confrontation. In this sense, I think the summit could function as a vital guardrail, guardrail with which we can sort of prevent the competition from getting out of control. There is little doubt, as I said before, the strategic competition would continue for a long time to come. But it's also important for two countries maintain key communication channels and guardrails. I think the summit can play that role. And there is also a geo-economic significance to the summit, because recently two countries were sort of embroiled in the worst ever trade war with each other. Although I believe the tension has scaled down to a certain extent after the Geneva meeting in last month. But still, there are so many pending issues, such as trade imbalances, tariffs, technology control or technology transfer, and what have you, really. So the U.S. and China, the two biggest economies in the world, together they occupy some 45% or 46% of world's GDP, if my memory serves me correct. So the way they settle economic disputes will have sweeping economic implications for the rest of the world.
Right. And staying with possible summits, Thomas, should the Chinese leader visit South Korea or partake, that is, in the APEC summit in the city of Gyeongju, it will mark his first trip here in some 11 years, I believe. Now, during talks on the phone with Xi Jinping, President Lee Jae-myung underscored the importance of economy and security between the two countries. That being said, what do you suppose the prospects of more productive bilateral ties between the two countries under the Lee Jae-myung and Xi Jinping administrations? And in what areas might these two sides see some tangible progress, Thomas?
Well, as you said, they had a phone call shortly after Lee Jae-myung was elected president. And, you would think there are definitely areas you could see the relationship taking a step forward. I mean, just in general, Lee Jae-myung has already laid out this idea of a more pragmatic diplomacy. I wouldn't say conciliatory necessarily toward China, but being more open to communications across the board. Where and this is somewhat in contrast to his predecessor, President Yoon, and also the previous U.S. President Biden, where there really was more of a two sides taking shape, global blocks, liberal democracy versus authoritarianism kind of, framing was taking shape, and Yoon had very much, decided to cast his lot with Washington. I mean, as much as is possible. Obviously, you can't just kind of write off China as South Korea. I mean, China remains South Korea's biggest trade partner, and it's just an important major power right next door. So there's some idea that Lee Jae-myung would be kind of opening the door to that. And then I think also in terms of just what's going on with the overall trade environment, the sort of uncertainty and chaos that's been inserted into it in these recent months, just with the possible tariffs, and we don't know where trade is going to land on that. So there's some idea that just generally, not just South Korea, but countries in the world, and especially U.S. allies, also sort of have to look at how can we position ourselves, maybe not to be as closely allied with the U.S., or at least leaving open the door for, engaging with China in different ways. And I think China is also aware of this opportunity in some areas. I mean, maybe the U.S. withdrawing from some of its aid projects around the world and things like that. China, you hear or read that China is certainly looking into those areas. So that whole landscape is changing, but it also coincides with, I think, Lee Jae-myung's inclination towards being more engaged. So we might see, other, I mean, one thing when you mentioned security too, Jae-myung, I think in his call mentioned wanting Beijing to perhaps help cooperate more on the North Korea issue and exert some influence on North Korea's growing nuclear and missile development. So that could be a potential area for some cooperation. We'll have to see where China, maybe decides North Korea is going too far or wants to impose its will. And then, there's obviously a lot of economic potential. At the same time, there still is globally, the diversifying supply chains. There has been already a kind of decoupling or de-risking. So, those factors are maybe also going to have South Korea looking in other directions as well. So, those are some basic points where you might see potential for cooperation.
Right, for sure. Professor Kim, speaking of summits, officials here in the country are actively working to arrange a one-on-one between President Lee Jae-myung and his American counterpart, Donald Trump. What are your thoughts regarding these efforts to ensure a meeting in the near future? And Professor Kim, are you concerned perhaps about a potential Oval Office ambush, if you will, by Mr. Trump against his South Korean counterpart? And if one does occur, what might be the issue of contention, and how should President Lee Jae-myung seek to navigate such a potential scenario?
The summit between President Lee and President Trump is bound to take place sooner or later, but we don't know the exact timing. The exact timing of the summit remains very uncertain at this stage. South Korean government, the Lee Jae-myung government, is making considerable efforts to make it happen as soon as possible. Maybe preferably during August, but realistically, we may have to wait until September when the UN General Assembly convenes in New York. I'm pretty sure that a brief summit between President Lee and President Trump will take place on the sideline of UN General Assembly. Although this summit is going to be very brief in nature because it's going to take place on the sideline. Second meeting is also likely during the APEC summit in Gyeongju, South Korea, later this year, October this year to be more precise. But we have to wait and see whether Mr. Trump is coming to the venue, as Thomas just mentioned. As I said, an August summit remains a tough call, largely because the U.S. politics goes into recess during most of August. Before the Lee-Trump summit, I think it's important for South Korea to reach a win-win package deal with the United States before August the 1st, which is the expiration date of the reciprocal tariff grace period. If two countries can deliver a deal that is akin to the one between the United States and Japan that came out yesterday, I believe President Trump would be more receptive to holding an earlier summit ahead of the September UN General Assembly. If this deal between South Korea and the U.S. resonates with President Trump, I don't think we'll have to worry too much about potential over-office ambush. I think it's also important for President Lee to sort of dispel this perception, or misperception, if you will, that he's a pro-China politician before the summit takes place, and it's necessary to preempt potential Oval Office ambush.
Right, Professor. Meanwhile, Thomas, back on the upcoming APEC summit in Gyeongju this autumn, do tell us a bit about the agenda this year, including, of course, South Korea's plans to touch upon falling birth rates and aging societies, which are topics that are not traditionally addressed by the APEC forum, right?
Right, that's correct. Just very generally, as you mentioned, it's being held in Gyeongju. Some 20,000 participants are expected to come, which is including 3,500 delegates from 21 member countries. The theme has been announced. It's building a sustainable tomorrow, and the keywords, I mean, these are very just sort of, you hear these kind of generic sounding things: connect, innovate, prosper. But some of the officials involved with planning have kind of given some indications of what the key focus points that they want to hit upon are. And this idea that focusing on kind of economic integration and free trade, which is what APEC is about in a lot of ways, will be front and center, strengthening the kind of multilateral trading system, and amid this era now of growing protectionism and fragmenting supply chains, so that's been what's sort of been indicated as a hope for bringing people to the table, or the participants to the table, and getting back to some of that, which will be an interesting thing to see how that plays out. Just seeing where we are 100 days from now in terms of the whole global tariff regime and the trade regime. So this could be a really significant subject at that time, and depending on who's attending as well. And they also mentioned highlights of focusing on digital transformation in the region, and AI in particular in South Korea, and this Lee Jae-myung administration has talked about AI being a real essential, focus going forward. So there's discussions about, there's plans to discuss cooperation for safe and inclusive AI, which is just another issue that is, so looming large in the future. And of course, like China and US have a lot to do with that. And then, as you mentioned briefly, South Korea had talked about wanting to bring up the question, or issues around declining birth rates and aging population, which of course are major, things that South Korea right now is dealing with maybe in a more acute way than a lot of countries. But it is out there for all, especially developed countries, are all facing, slowing birth rates, declining populations. Even China is as well looming large. So obviously a topic that has resonance for the participants.
Right. Professor Kim, SK Group Chairman Choi Tae-won will be hosting the APEC CEO Summit this year. Now, speaking to members of the media, he recently proposed an EU-style economic bloc, including South Korea and Japan. What are your thoughts regarding such a regional bloc?
In theory, I believe Chairman Choi Tae-won's proposal makes a lot of sense. His proposal, in a nutshell, is that South Korea and Japan should establish, as you mentioned, an EU-like economic bloc. Why is that? Because the economies of two countries are grappling with similar problems, such as stagnant growth, aging populations, and rising, most importantly, rising global trade barriers. So if South Korea and Japan can somehow create an EU-like economic bloc, this is going to be at least $6 trillion economic zone, making it the fourth largest economy in the world. This in turn will place South Korea and Japan in a much better position to tackle shared geo-economic challenges. But that said, I'm not really sure whether this proposal is viable in terms of domestic politics. True that the current relationship between the two countries, South Korea and Japan, is in much better position than, say, 5 to 7 years ago, but still there are many hurdles that we need to cross before we fully mend fences with each other. Among many other things, there are long-standing historical grievances and territorial disputes over Dokdo Island. So given these realities, economic bloc is going to be a hard sell, in my personal opinion, in terms of domestic politics in both countries. But that said, as Chairman Choi mentioned, two countries need to be more forward-looking. Bilateral relationship with the U.S. has been the centerpiece of security and economic policies in both countries. But now the U.S. has become a very different country. And with the U.S. policy shifting, South Korea and Japan, I think we have to reach out to each other and deepen our ties, just as European countries have reached out to each other and try to rely less on the United States recently. Not only that, I think it's also important for South Korea and Japan to reach out to European countries as well, so we can tackle shared global challenges down the road.
Right. Thomas, speaking as a foreign journalist based here in Seoul, are there any underreported, perhaps, aspects of South Korea's hosting of the APEC summit that you believe deserve more international attention?
Well, I think South Korea hosting it will bring South Korean foreign policy and this administration kind of into maybe a global spotlight, and it's a chance to show where South Korea is on the international stage, especially after this period of chaos during the martial law and impeachment hearing. So I think that will be something that is probably picked up. I mean, you would think China and the U.S. will still kind of be headlines for this, but I think that will get its due. Maybe of local interest, but that could be intriguing storyline to cover. I've seen it covered locally already, is just Gyeongju hosting this event in the first place, and there's already been discussions of is it behind on the preparations? Are the facilities adequate? You know, there's only supposedly a couple of 5-star hotels in Gyeongju, and there's transportation questions, and that's something that I think is going to be an ongoing, maybe up to the point of hosting this story. And it's something obviously you think South Korea is well capable of pulling these sorts of things off, but a few outlets have already pointed to the World Scout Jamboree in 2023, that sort of disastrous hosting of that. So there's some question of, can South Korea pull this off? And I think related to that too is just this sense of what South Korea is trying to do to bring development, bring attention to regions other than Seoul, by hosting it in Gyeongju. And this is just such a major issue domestically, but has just many effects as the country continues to develop, that so much economic, political, cultural, everything power is focused in Seoul, and what that does to the rest of the country. So, that Gyeongju may help shine a light on that story as well.
Right. And this is something we'll probably cover some more ahead of the actual summit in Gyeongju later this year. All right, Thomas, I'm afraid that's all the time. Thank you so much for your time and your thoughts today. Professor Kim, thank you so much for your thought-provoking insights today. Right, and that is all for this edition of Press Perspective. Do join us again same time tomorrow.
Arirang TV is conducting an overseas TV viewer survey to provide you with a better global broadcast service. Share your valuable feedback on the Arirang TV website www.arirang.com or